Good afternoon. Good. How are you? Tough to say questions or
You
handle this?
want to give an opening statement?
I'm good. You can
No,
ask
you're
questions.
good? Okay,
Better that
so
way.
you can go ahead and start with your questions. Mics are right here, one here and one there.
Hey, Coach. Sam Connor from Sports Illustrated. Just general expectations for the team this season, knowing that you're so experienced, more experienced than almost any other team in the Pac-12, returning guys, having that late spring practice. What does that mean to you, having everyone kind of back?
Yeah, it's comforting. You know, it took us a while to get to this point. You know, it'll be the first time we've had over 80 scholarship players. You know, we were under for a while. So part of the depth part is, I think we had 115 kids for spring ball. You know, my first season here, we had about 65 for spring ball. So our numbers have changed drastically. And in our classes are now a little bit more evenly distributed. So we've got a group of juniors and seniors that have been around and have played a lot of football. So we're going to have to rely on that experience. You know, the one thing that I'm happy about going into the season is just our depth. You know, and I think that's where we've been challenged the most. But we feel like we've solved some of the depth issues. And the big thing will just be can we stay healthy going into camp and get ready for our out-of-conference schedule before we get into conference play.
Hey, Chip, Tracy Pearson. Wanted to ask you a little bit about that, too. The transfers that came in and the early entrant guys, what kind of impact did you see on spring practice comparatively to other spring practices? What did they do for the team?
You know, a bunch of them have played a lot of football. So I think the one thing that happens when you bring in transfers is just the language. And it's one of the reasons we went so late in spring, so that we had an opportunity to get in the meeting room and spend time with them and get them kind of up to par. They certainly understand how to play football and were successful where they came from. So we're really excited about now we get into preseason camp ready to get the season started. But I think we've got a real good base to start with. And as part of the design of going so late, just getting everybody up to speed, you know, especially the transfer kids that came in, not in January, but came in for that April window, so we could get everybody on the same page. So we're excited about that, and I think that's one of the pluses of this team is the depth.
Up, Joe Reedy from AP. Just how much of an advantage was it practicing late in May, and was it almost like your days in the NFL of an OTA and kind of mini camp?
Yeah, it was, and that was our plan going into it. We're a quarter school, so we had a bunch of kids that enrolled for April. Normally, we would have knocked out 6 or so practices in the winter term, but we waited till late because of the COVID rules. You couldn't go on the road recruiting, so part of the design, we had it set up really like we did OTAs when we were in the NFL, and I think our retention will be a lot better. We start camp on Friday, so there really wasn't much time off between when we ended spring ball until we start here. They've had a good session with our strength and conditioning program, you know, in the interim, and then we're excited to hit the ground running. But that was the design of going as late as we went, and I think it's going to pay off for us.
Hey, David Shaw said you don't get enough credit nationally for the way you changed college football. Where is college football now compared to when you were?
When I was in Eugene, we were the only team that had shiny helmets and played with 5 wide receivers, and everybody plays with shiny helmets and 5 wide receivers now. So I think the game of football is cyclical, and there's ebbs and flows to everything that goes on. It's very gracious of David to say that, and I owe him $20 because he told me he would. I didn't believe he would say it. So, but I think we all steal from whoever was in where we are. I think just the one thing is because of social media, and there's a huge coaching group on social media that posts a lot of stuff. I think people have more access. You know, back in the day, you couldn't get NFL film. You couldn't watch all 22. But now you can, and you can study it. And then the best coaches can take what they've learned, and then how can I apply it to the group of people that I have? You know, and what's the best situation to put my players in the best situation to make plays? So that's what the guys who are great at doing it. You know, David does a great job with what he does at Stanford. They're unique in kind of what they do. But he's got an answer for what people do to combat him. And so I think that's part of the whole process that we're going through. But where we got it from or how we did it, we were just trying to score points, and it was, you know, that was beneficial to us at the time. But, you know, when you go back to just in the history of football, the Buffalo Bills were running no huddle in the National Football League with Jim Kelly. Sam Weish was doing it with the Cincinnati Bengals and Boomer Esiason in the 80s. So it's not something that we invented, that we brought to the game. It's just something that we said would be beneficial to us when we were at Oregon, and we added it, and it helped us be successful. I think our lines have just from a depth standpoint, we feel really confident with the amount of people on both our offensive and defensive lines that we can now play in a game. And I think that's where we were probably challenged the most early when I first got there, was just kind of replenishing both the offensive and defensive lines. But feel really confident with the group of guys that we have on both sides of the ball up front, and that's really where the game is won. So that's what kind of gives us some confidence going into the season.
Hey, Coach, you guys are a few weeks into the new deal with Jordan Brand. What's been the feedback from recruits, and what kind of impact do you anticipate this deal having in recruiting?
I think that helps. It always helps. It's such a iconic brand, and I think everybody wants to be associated with an iconic brand. But I've always have been just a big fan of the product. I think sometimes that gets glossed over, what a good product it is. And I had a chance, we were in the office yesterday, spent a little time with our equipment guy, checking all the new stuff that came in, and looking at the new prototype cleats that Jordan has and what that's going to provide for us, especially our big guys. We do have some really big guys on our team, that the support that those guys, that the product itself gives it. So I think twofold, it's going to help us obviously with recruiting, because everybody wants to be associated with it. But I think the product that we have is outstanding, and we're really excited to start using it.
Mentioned the shiny helmets. Any plans to maybe spice things up for UCLA?
That's one of the things I like about UCLA. You don't have to make any decisions from a uniform standpoint. There's a couple programs in college football that have iconic uniforms, and UCLA being one of them. And I call it the airport test. If you walk in an airport and you look at the corner of your eye, you can tell who's playing. You know when Alabama's playing, when Penn State's playing, when UCLA's playing, and that's working really well for this program, and I'm not going to change that. So.
Chip, you obviously have a very long and established relationship with Ryan Day from his time playing with you and obviously in coaching. Curious, historically, why did it take him so long to end up working for you in Philadelphia? Why didn't he end up working for you at Oregon in the many years before? Obviously, I know
Because he
had
turned me
plenty of
down.
jobs.
I wasn't as good a recruiter as I was when I got to the NFL. So, he's got a lot of very East Coast ties, and both from the same hometown, and have known each other. I coached him in college, so we've always tried to get together. It just didn't work out when we were at Oregon together, but when I got to Philadelphia, it worked. So he was with me in Philly and San Francisco before we went to Ohio State. So.
Joking aside, you really did try to
Oh,
bring
yeah.
him in at different points when
Oh,
you
yeah.
were in Eugene?
Yeah.
He was tied to either
Timing,
Boston College-
family, different things, kind of where he was in his career, commitment that he made to Coach Adazio and things like that.
When you converse with him in off-season, particularly in off-season like this, where obviously they're playing Oregon, you have common experience playing a defensive coordinator who they just hired as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing everything, obviously, but can you characterize just those conversations of how much a lifelong relationship is about football versus how much that conversation
Yeah.
is life and
The unique things about our lifelong relationships is when we're together. I actually talked to him yesterday for a while. We're talking about our families and, played golf with them over the weekend. We were both back home in New Hampshire, but very rarely do we talk football anymore. We're just talking about life, family, his kids, my wife, his wife. So. He's improved a lot. I think the one thing about Dorian that I love is just his thirst for knowledge. He constantly is working on his game, whether it's the physical stuff, whether it be the weight room, speed work, film watching, decision making, how to become a better leader. And those are questions where he's like, Coach, you got 10 minutes, I'll pop up, and he's got a notebook out and a list of questions, and he's rattling off that, he's always trying to improve. And that's the one thing I love about him, is that he never stands pat on what he is. He's in the best shape of his life. But I could have said that going into every camp, because he's continued to improve from that standpoint. So he always wants to get better, and knows that, if he can be a little bit better tomorrow than he was today, then he's on the right track. And that's the way he's been since we've been there. The unique thing is it is year 4. We get an opportunity to work together for 4 full years. So I'm excited to see what this season brings for him, because I know how much he's invested in it. Sure. You know, I think our players have a lot of confidence, and it was evident when we worked in the spring. You know, I think they know what it takes. You know, and first and foremost, we have to do a better job protecting the football. You know, in the games we lost the turnover battle. And if we can straighten out the turnover battle, then I think we got a pretty good shot. You know, we'll continue to create them on the defensive side of the ball, but we have to not be very not give it up too much on the offensive side of the ball. And I think we spent a lot of time. We were better at that in the spring. We'll continue to work on that. But our guys know how close we are to being a really good football team. And we got a bunch of guys back that have a ton of experience. So good part about us is we don't talk about glasses half empty, half full. We're just talking about football. So we're excited about the opportunity that's presented to us this season.
Coach, Gerard Moncure from Fox 11 here in LA. Obviously, the season opener's got its own hype. Kids are ready to play. But right after that game, you got the big shiny object right next to it, LSU. I'm just curious what the approach is to keep the kids focused on Hawaii and not worry about the marquee game that's coming up.
Yeah. We really have a standard that we train to on a daily basis, so we won't talk about Hawaii or LSU or Fresno State or anybody in the league, you know, until we get to that part. We have a specific week in practice where we'll lay our initial install down, and then we'll spend a couple practices on Hawaii, and then we'll spend a couple practices on LSU, and then we'll spend a couple practices on Fresno, just to get in preparation for those guys before we get to game week. But, you know, we respect everybody we play and understand that the only way you can get beat by an opponent is if you don't respect an opponent. So our sole focus is, can we get better on a daily basis? And then really, we'll spend a little time in camp on it, but when really the week of the Hawaii game, our sole focus that week will be on the Hawaii.
Coach, you were talking about how Nike and Jordan helped the recruiting, talking about that with recruits coming in, but you also have name, image, likeness that started earlier this month. Have you discussed that with recruits who have come to visit, and what does that kind of do for college football and college sports as a whole?
Well, we've discussed it with our team. We didn't have any visits. Name, image, and likeness came in July 1st, so we didn't have any visits because it's been a dead period. So, you know, we'll start to get some people on campus this week. But from a name, image, and likeness standpoint, it's just I think players were allowed, and rightly so, to make decisions that they had to wait till their eligibility was expired before they could start to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness. And now they can capitalize that right when they enroll as a freshman. So I think it's a positive. Our job as educators is just to make sure we provide them with the information they need to make really smart decisions. You know, and our school is partnered with Influencer and Compass. You know, Compass from a compliance standpoint and Influencer from a personal brand standpoint. And we've had meetings, and our players have had meetings throughout our whole athletic department in all sports of, you know, what you can do to kind of capitalize on this, but understand that the decisions that you make can affect your image. You know, so you really got to be well thought out in what you're looking at, and we encourage them to have advisors and to have some people to bounce some ideas off of in terms of where they are. But I think it's a really good thing, and I think it's time coming. I think some people were concerned that it was an Armageddon and what's going to happen. But I think they forgot the Olympics went to this model a while ago and didn't seem to really affect what they do. You know, Apollo Ono got a Subway commercial, and some people had some Visa commercials, but I don't think it changed the landscape of any of those sports. So I really don't think it's going to make that big an impact at our sport, but I think it's something that was necessary at this time.
What players on your team have struck NIL?
That's questions for them. So like same thing. Like I don't ask my assistant coaches like, you know, did you paint a house this summer and make any money for that either? So I think that's all individual things for those guys. So they, you know, it's questions you can ask the players, and it's up to them in terms of what they want to reveal or not reveal. That's part of, I guess, running your own business. So.
Coach, on that same lines, Cameron Buford, Los Angeles News Observer.
Yeah.
Along that same lines, how do you expect this to impact the locker room? And then how much time have you devoted to coaching your teammate, coaching your players up, making sure they know what's good and what's bad on the name, image, and likeness?
As I said earlier, our entire athletic department partnered with Influencer and Compass. You know, Compass from a compliance standpoint, and Influencer from a personal brand standpoint. So we've had multiple meetings with our players on the subject, and it's also a resource. You know, Aaron Atkins, who's in our compliance office, has been tremendous in terms of providing support for our players. And as I've talked to her and had conversations where many players have called her and asked questions, and we tell them you always got to ask questions and permission instead of forgiveness, because it could jeopardize your eligibility. So our players have been great on that, and we'll continue to educate them, and that's just part of the process. Again, I think it's something that was totally necessary, and I think they deserve it. It's just making sure they handle it the right way.
Yeah, do you expect this to have any impact on the locker room, the culture, the camaraderie inside the locker room?
No, I mean, anytime you introduce anything new, you got to be conscious of it. But right now, I think so far so good. Everything's been, all the reports I've gotten back from talking to our players. We've been away from them because it's been a dead period for us. We actually will start back with meetings on Friday, so we'll spend a little bit more time with our guys on a face-to-face basis about it. But we have a mature team, and so I really don't think it'll be. First and foremost, they know that part of their image is that they've got to be doing things right in the classroom, and they're going to be doing right things on the football field. So.
Hi, Chip. Nick Selby from Sports Illustrated. George Kliefkoff will be your third commissioner since you've been a coach in the Pac-12, second as a head coach. How does a new commissioner impact your job as a coach, if at all?
Well, it's really I just knew Larry, and that was it. So, because I wasn't a head coach before, and I never met the commissioner before Larry. So, obviously, I think in these times in college football, who's the commissioner of your conference and who's leading you in some of these uncharted territories, I think is critical. I got a chance to meet George yesterday and thought he was really intelligent, really sharp. I think he's articulate. I think he can explain his vision in terms of what he wants to get accomplished. So I'm excited to work with him. And he seems like he's collaborative, and that was kind of the words that he talked about yesterday with us as coaches. So I'm excited to kind of see what the direction of this conference is under George's leadership.
Thank you.
Chip Kelly, Fredo Cervantes within the front row. Having DTR as your QB for the first 3 years, now heading into his fourth year in the senior year, what is your approach with him, and what do you expect for him after this year?
I think the beauty is having Dorian for 4 years. He didn't get an opportunity to play in high school until his senior year. He was playing wide receiver as a junior because they had another quarterback that was a pretty good player. So, he came in and just kind of jumped in both feet, and every day Dorian is always striving to get better, and he's just a joy to coach. You love kids like that are thirsty for knowledge and have that kind of growth mindset that we always talk about. You want our players to have, and that's what he has. And I'm really excited to see where he is right now. I know he's in the best shape of his life. He's worked extremely hard in the weight room, extremely hard on the field, throwing with receivers and kind of organizing everything that goes on in the summer program because the coaches aren't allowed to be around him until this Friday. So we've got great expectations of him, but our expectations of him are no bigger than his expectations of himself. And I think it's all born out of his work ethic, and I think he's got a tremendous work ethic.
What surprised you the first 3 years with him, having the opportunity to coach
I think
him?
not knowing him, but I think the one thing that just jumped out from his true freshman year is just how tough he is. He is a tough physical football player. In I think it was either his second or his third game, we went into Oklahoma, and he was getting knocked around a little bit and just kept getting up and threw an unbelievable touchdown pass to Theo Howard down the far sideline, and with someone draped in his face. And I think that's a quality in a quarterback that people don't spend enough time talking about. But for you to be a really, really successful quarterback, you have to be a tough person, and he's an extremely tough person.
Thank you, Chip.
That's a great segue, Chip. Dennis Dodd, CBS
Dennis, what's
Sports.
up?
How you doing?
Good.
You can see half my face. I was just going to ask about that. How do you evaluate quarterbacks' ability to stand in against pressure, blitz? How do you measure guts when you're recruiting?
It's I don't think it's talked about enough in what that position is, and I think everybody, they protect the quarterback. He doesn't get there's not a quarterback in the NFL or in college football that doesn't get hit. And it's a different kind of toughness. You're not the one inflicting the physical punishment. You're the one taking the physical punishment while, oh, by the way, you're supposed to zip a 20-yard dig route in between the safety and the corner. And it's one of those things that I think is difficult to quantify because all of us, and I don't care what level coach you are, you don't let your quarterback get hit in practice because, if you did, you'd be probably run out of the business. You're not going to lose your kid on the practice field. So the only time they get hits is on Saturdays in college football and on Sundays in the NFL. And it's a quality that if you understand the game and the nuances of the game, then you just sit there and watch guys that repeatedly stand in there and are trying to avoid, but know that, hey, sometimes I got to take it because I got to complete this pass. And anybody that's played for a prolonged period of time at that position, you can tell how tough they are. And Dorian's as tough as a guy as I've been around. Darren Thomas, when I was at Oregon earlier, was one of those guys, and we would show clips to our players of, watch the hit the quarterback takes on this play. Nick Foles was that way in the NFL. Like, you just watch the hit Nick takes as he throws his seam ball for a touchdown, and I think when you point that out to the players in the room, they're like, I'm not sure what other kids at other positions could do that. Just stand there, let someone hit you, and then you still execute at the highest level. And I think it's a quality for quarterbacks that doesn't get talked about enough, but I think it's really kind of what's a difference maker for a lot of the guys that are the great ones. The Tom Brady's that stand in there, and Tom's going into age 43, and the amount of hits he's taken in his life, standing in the pocket and completing the football. Him, Ben Roethlisberger, almost anybody in the NFL that's a starting quarterback in the NFL is a pretty tough dude.
Maybe a dumb question, but is there a way to teach them how to fall where you don't?
We do that,
Yeah.
when we talk a little bit about, how to protect yourself when you land, kind of like you teach a wrestler or a jiu-jitsu guy. We quarterback coaches will always simulate things with bags, but it's not the same as when Aaron Donald or a 300-pound three technique is just beat the guard and is coming at you clean, and you got to get the ball off. It's the one things that I don't think fans appreciate enough is how tough you have to be a quarterback.
Chip, I know how much you hate history questions, but
I love history questions if it's on Jeopardy.
but in honor of Ben not being here, the Hawaii game, considering your non-conference starts the past couple years, with the exception of last year not having non-conference games, how important is that Hawaii game?
You mean the 2 years that we've had non-conference starts? That long history of
Yes, that one.
I mean,
Just
I don't
said-
think,
just-
we'll never have a conversation with our team about our game against Hawaii compared to non-conference games 2 years ago. So that's what I call a TBU, and that stands for true but useless. So if it's true but useless, I don't really share that with our team. So is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Coach, you were talking about having George here at the Pac-12, meeting him yesterday, and the direction of the conference. Obviously, there's a lot going on with realignment and expansion at other conferences. Just generally, are there any pros or cons to expansion from a coaching perspective that you have?
I don't know, and I think everybody, when things happen in the moment, you're trying to project what it's going to look like. So 10 years ago when I was in this league, we were the Pac-16, and we were adding Texas and Baylor and Oklahoma State, and I don't know the reasons because I wasn't involved in the decision, but that fell through, and then we added Colorado and Utah, and then Nebraska left the Big 12, and they went to the Big 10, and everything was crazy, and then all of a sudden it settled down, and everybody got back to normal day-to-day things, and the only thing that suffered was the math, because the Big 12 was 10 teams, and the Big 10 was 14 teams, and that was it. And so I don't know. I know the story is that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. I think it's a lot of things at this day and age. I think tradition is butting up against money, when people are making decisions of tradition versus money. So is expansion equal dilution? I don't know. I really don't think. I think it's something that you have to look back on, after you get a couple years into it to say, was this a good maneuver or this was a bad maneuver? So what are coaches looking for in expansion? I'll be honest with you, and I think I'm speaking for most coaches. No one asks us, so I don't really look at it, and I don't care. I was never involved in the conversations 10 years ago when I was in this league of who we were adding or who we weren't adding. And no one's asked us since, so if they do add some teams to our league, then that's great, because I really enjoy the teams that we have right now. And if we add some more that the people above us, the commissioner and the presidents of the universities think will be great additions, then have at it. So, but for us on an individual basis, I couldn't tell you if it's right for expansion or wrong for expansion, but I know it's got a lot more to do with money than it does with tradition right now. So.
Got time for one more question?
Commissioner talked today about forming a new working group with the coaches and ADs for football and doing more of a collaborative, kind of what they've done with men's basketball. How much do you think that'll help conference-wise, just trying to get more of a focus on scheduling and everything?
Well, I've never been a part of that, so I mean, I think it sounds on paper like it's a great idea. So we'll see. I think the scheduling thing really has to kind of fall in line with what ends up happening with conference realignment. If you want to go from 9-game individual conference schedule to an 8-game individual conference schedule, then you need to pick up 72 games. And where are those games right now? A lot of teams are already scheduled out, and they're out of conference games through the next 4 or 5 years. So it's easy to say, hey, we'll drop one conference game, and then everybody go out and pick up a game. Well, if no one has a game that you can pick up, where do you go? So I think there's some work that needs to be done in terms of how you look at that. But I think the fact that, one of George's first initiatives is that he wants to just take a holistic view of how can we make everything better in the league is just a step in the positive direction. I don't know. Because I've never played any other schedule, so I couldn't tell you, hey, when I was in a league and we played an 8-game schedule, I thought this was a lot better for you. So I don't have the data points to be able to say when we were in an 8-team league, this is what happened. So 9 is what I've always been used to. So that's kind of just what I know. So
Okay, thank you, Coach.
thanks, guys.